Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. This must be great. I think y'all might be able to hear me. So, yeah, I just made the change. Let me type in here. Yay, it's working. Thank goodness. So, I don't know if this one's going to be as long as the first. Hey, what's up, Glowbusters? I'm assuming that's Bob or Jaron. Hey guys, yeah, I just did this live stream a couple hours ago. I did it for a whole hour, and yeah, come to find out there was no sound that ended up recording. So bummer. So I think I'm gonna do this one a little bit more quickly than the last. Because it's 11 o'clock here Eastern, and I got to be up at 4:30 in the morning, so I might just breeze through this a little more quickly, and well, hopefully we'll get it close to the way I had it the first time around. But as everybody's joining in, I just want to welcome you. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for this second attempt. And actually, while I'm here, I'll go ahead and post a link up to this on Facebook. See if I can get a few more people in before I get started. So I hope you guys all had a great Tuesday today. My Tuesday sucked, but hey, at least it wasn't Monday, and at least tomorrow's Wednesday. So we got that one over with, that's for sure. Okay, so let's see how many people we got popped in here yet. Just a couple few. But I'll just go ahead and breeze through these things real quick. The first thing that I wanted to mention is the reason that I'm doing a live stream here on my backup channel is because, as some of you guys know, I got 2 community guideline strikes in the last week or two. After being pretty much silent on YouTube for several months, I did a video and a live stream, and within just a couple days, I got 2 community guideline strikes just out of the blue. First I've ever had, and of course this means I cannot live stream or post videos on on my primary channel. So that's a pretty big bummer, but hey, at least I have the backup channel. I can get live streams out there. And this whole timing really kind of sucks on YouTube's part because I was pretty well made my mind up that I was going to put out my audiobook in or my book as an audiobook format in little 1-chapter segments at a time and get that out there for everybody. But either, I don't know, I may post it on the backup channel, or I may just wait the 3 months before I can post videos again. But we will see how it goes on that front. So just sort of jumping right into the things I wanted to cover, because again, I'm probably just going to breeze through these pretty quickly. Let me get my notes here. Yeah, so as flat earthers, one of the big things that we always talk about, and rightfully so, is how flat the earth is. No curvature. That's a pretty big one we can prove in lots of different ways. But I think another really big part of this that to me is more easily proven or more easily demonstrable is the stationary nature of the Earth, the lack of motion, whether it's rotation or whether it's orbital. There is no physical evidence for any of the motion which they claim anywhere. And it gets pretty wild when you get out into the galactic orbital velocities. It's just mind-boggling. But there is no physical evidence for this motion. And quite frankly, if the Earth was spinning around and orbiting as they say, it should be very easy to prove that that such motion exists. Now, one of the biggest arguments we get from the Globehead team on the stationary argument is, of course, the spinning Earth is a fixed frame of reference, and so we don't notice any sort of acceleration because we are also zeroed out at the 0-point base frame of reference with the Earth. So we don't feel any acceleration, and it's a fixed frame of reference. Now, that's all well and good. So, we'll just hypothetically say, for example, a levitational train very smooth ride, is going, 1,000 miles an hour straight down a track. You wouldn't, you could call that as a fixed frame of reference. And any object that is traveling at the same velocity inside of that train would be stationary relative to the train. That's granted, that's agreed. But when you start dealing with that train, say, going constantly along a curvilinear path, then you would necessarily experience acceleration in that train in the form of angular acceleration, and that is manifest as centrifugal force. And so, to put this in a little bit of analogous demonstrational form, you can, and I'm not going to get a copyright strike, but you can YouTube search small drones flying inside of shipping trucks. So, you can rent a U-Haul and fly a little drone around inside of there and do some experiments. But most of these videos have, they're pretty similar. They'll have the drone on the floorboard of the truck, and they'll accelerate the truck to, say, 20 or 25 miles an hour. And then at some point, as the truck's traveling straight, they'll lift the drone up off the ground. And of course, as long as that truck stays straight, then the drone will more or less hover. And it's not that difficult to get it to do that. But if you really want to sort of tailor this experiment to fit the globe Earth, then you would need that truck going along a constant turn, along a constant curve path. And what you would find, should you do this experiment, is that the drone is not going to continue relatively fixed with the motion or the frame of reference with the truck as it's going along a curve. And this is because there's a big difference between linear motion and curvilinear motion. And of course, if you're spinning along the face of the Earth at 1,000 miles an hour along that curve, then that's curvilinear motion. And there should be anything but a fixed frame of reference, because you would have to deal with that angular momentum constantly. Angular acceleration constantly. And that's just with axial rotation. So, this big, huge must for the heliocentric model, which is this supersonic axial rotation at the equator, really starts to fall apart under lots of different forms of scrutinizing it. And so, in terms of like these drones inside of trucks, I'd really like to see an experiment done with a small drone going from the front to the back of a moving train, or the back to the front of the same moving train, and clock how long it takes to do each journey. And physically, you don't even have to do this experiment to know it, but physically, the drone would travel from the front towards the rear of the moving train much more swiftly than it would racing back towards the front from the rear. And again, this is because once that drone leaves is no longer fastened to the ground or no longer stuck to the ground of that moving train and takes off and begins to accelerate towards the rear, the rear of the train is going to be racing towards the drone as the drone is racing towards the rear of the train. And vice versa, when it has to, return from the rear towards the front, then it's actually racing against the front of the train, and it would have a further distance to travel. It should take much longer, and that's a given. But for globe heads to claim that the face of the spinning Earth is a fixed frame of reference, it really is quite absurd, because again, we're dealing with curvilinear motion, and we should be constantly experiencing angular acceleration. Now, there's a few different ways to look at this, a few different proofs. One thing that I like to point out is okay, so if they say that the momentum, or the angular momentum, or the spinning nature of the face of the Earth is a fixed frame of reference, then, my next question would be, at which latitude? Because, if you're at the equator, that's 1,000 miles an hour east. But if you're close to the pole, you're dealing with hardly any, rotational velocity. Getting down close to zero, the closer you get towards the pole, hypothetically. And so, how does the fixed frame of reference know which latitude it's at, right? I mean, so that is kind of a big problem. But, the biggest problem with this is the disparity, again, in the motion at the equator compared to the North Pole. So, again, at the equator, you're supposed to be going 1,000 miles an hour east. At the pole, you're supposedly not spinning at all. And yet somehow, not only is gravity completely at odds with this, right? Because gravity would be balancing out the observer at the equator and his outward centrifugal force, while the gravity at the North Pole wouldn't have any outward thrust to negate. And so you would expect, say, a ton of coffee to weigh in at much more at the pole due to not the lack, not the abundance of gravity, but the lack of centrifugal force there. So, there's just lots of different problems with this whole spinning ball Earth theory. And of course, the flight durations from New York to LA and back uh, also sort of prove this point nicely. The duration of those two flights is often similar or identical in duration, when you should have the westbound flight racing towards LA as LA races towards the flight. And on the other hand, when you're going back to New York on that same, path of travel, then the plane should be racing against New York. And, frankly, the fact that these two durations of flights are often very similar, if not identical, some of the time at least, then this proves that the Earth isn't spinning as they claim. But there's so many ridiculous arguments against all of these proofs. And yeah, I just went through all this stuff like an hour ago, so it's kind of hard for me to remember what I've said this time and what I said last time. But, the fact of the matter is we can take the drone experiment, and apply that to planes, and it'll become painfully obvious anyone who is able to do this. Now, if you do find some videos online in your spare time and look for drones inside of moving trucks, a lot of times they just do some basic hovering and small maneuvering, but I haven't seen any of them trying to clock, how long does it take the drone to travel from the front towards the rear compared to the rear to the front. And my money would be that the drone would make it from the front of the moving truck to the rear much more swiftly than it would from the rear to the front. Again, just based on these laws of physics, really just laws of logic and common sense, which dictate that objects moving towards one another will have a higher relative difference in speed than objects, racing against one another. So yeah, I breezed through that section very, very quickly, and I'm sure I made tons of better points the first time around, but I just had to get this live stream out there, guys. It just drives me crazy when I spend time on something and then no payoff. But one thing I did want to mention real quick is we saw the supermoon just, I guess, last week or week and a half ago, which was really amazing. And lots of people saw the, practically 100% full moon well after sunrise, well into the day. And, this is just categorically impossible on the ball Earth theory. And I do actually have a diagram up here that I made during the last live stream. So this may make it a little bit easier to make this point. But let's say we're looking at a top-down view of the solar system, and in theory, hypothetically, you got the sun, the Earth going around the sun, and then of course the moon going around the Earth. Now, whenever you're on the day side of the Earth, obviously you're going to see blue skies, and whenever you're on the night side of the Earth, you're obviously going to see night skies. And of course, you've got the terminating line in between. Now, to give you an idea of, let's say you've got an observer, oh, and this is top down, so there's your North Pole, and this is your equator around the Earth, hypothetically. If you've got an observer that's standing at the equator at high noon, then his field of view would be represented by these angles here. And it's a little more than 180 degrees, but the point is that any sky that this observer can see here is going to be blue sky from the day side of the Earth. And, 12 hours later going through, well, wrong way, 12 hours later going through the twilight zone back to midnight, this is where he would be. So real quick, let's just slide over here to the moon, because the phases of the moon are dictated by their position in their orbital cycle. And so over here, directly 180 degrees from the sun, you would have a full moon. This right here would be a half moon, also a half moon, and no moon. This is dictated by the heliocentric model. This is not my opinion. This is not my claim. This is the heliocentric model. So the long and short of this is, and I know I've covered this before, but I always get such silly arguments, which I'll cover maybe one or two of them just for laughs. But the full moon is necessarily going to be, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% full. You could have a, let's see here, a waning gibbous or a waxing gibbous, but anywhere in this direction, anywhere here to here, the gibbous moons to the full moons, this is going to be on the night side of the Earth. So like in the case of the supermoon last week, what we saw was the full moon, we'll say maybe somewhere over here and even here and over here. It was seen really all times of the day, at least within a few days of the 100% full super moon. And this is categorically impossible. I mean, geometrically, if the full moon is supposed to be over here, and technically it would be like way over here, right? But well, we can put it here just for argument's sake. How is it possible to see the full moon that must be right here to see it overhead here? And the answer to that is it's not physically possible on a globe. You can't have that. It's not going to happen. And similarly, you've got, let's just say this is your no moon or your crescent. Over in this area, the moon should always be in the daytime, and yet we can often see crescent moons way over here or over here. So this is, this is a physical impossibility on the globe model. It's really simple. Anyone can verify this. And yet we'll get arguments like, oh, well, the reason that you don't understand this is because you don't understand just how big space really is. And, this is obviously ridiculous, because the further you place the moon away from the Earth, the more and more divergent your line of sight towards space would become from the moon's, or a line of sight towards the moon. So, the closer you place this, this angle is more doable, even though it's not doable even if it was right here. You can't see out of the back of your head. But the further you place this, the worse and worse and worse this problem gets. And so the argument of, oh, you don't know how big space is just a total moot point altogether. So yeah, I think I covered that. Another thing I wanted to touch real quickly, because we will talk about something flat. It doesn't all have to be physics or study of bodies in motion. But this one here, I just love it. I'll touch on it briefly. You can check the page at beyondhorizons.eu. But this is the current world record for long distance landscape photography. Oh, you know what? Am I not sharing my screen? I cannot believe. Wow, I got to reshare my screen for all that. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. I should have been looking at my doggone what's the name. All right. So, wow. Let me just go back to this real quick. Okay. So this is the visual here. The full moon's got to be over here necessarily because it's going to be 180 degrees opposite the sun. Yet we can often see the full moon way over here. Okay, so that's not possible. And again, where the argument where they say, oh, you know, you don't know how big space is. Well, the further you place the moon, the more divergent it is from that potential line of sight towards space for an observer on the equator at high noon. And, you know, you could even put the observer, I don't know, you could put him even at like, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning. And you're still not going to get a line of sight towards the moon. Come on, you. You're not going to get a line of sight towards the moon anytime during the day. You can see this line of sight still doesn't diverge with this. And again, the further you place the moon, the worse that divergence becomes. So hopefully that that diagram there has helped a little bit. Sorry, I totally forgot to screen share there for a minute. Okay, so this here, moving right along to Pic de Fenestreas from Pic de Acrins. It's 273 miles. This mountain range here, this is the one we're looking at, is 2.5 miles from base to peak. And we're viewing this from an observational point of, I think, 1.75 miles. Now, this is a really great, it's a really great proof that the Earth is flat because, frankly, you know, such a long distance visibility of a distant, you know, even 2.5 mile peak is physically impossible. So just to break down the geometry a little bit, the observation, this is where we started. Observation point was 1.7 miles high. The distance over the curve is 273 miles. And the target object is 2.5 miles tall to the peak. Now, what we're looking at here is the observer's line of sight towards the horizon. And according to globe Earth trigonometry, then his line of sight should become a tangent to the curve at about 117, 118 miles, and would diverge from the curve of the Earth exponentially with distance to the point where it reaches the target object 273 miles away. Now, again, with this mountain being 2.5 miles tall and the expected horizon obscuring the object would be another 0.54 miles above that. So not only can we see the tip top of this peak, but we can see pretty much the whole base of the mountain and lots of other mountains near it. We don't know how far these are, but this one here is 273 miles. So what should happen is from that vantage point, you should not see this mountain in the distance at all. So of course, Team Globy is going to come forward and say, oh, well, it's refraction. And so we're expected to believe that this mountain here is raising up into the sky, apparently, for this observer over here, about 3 miles. Because, again, you'd have to raise it up just to get the tip to where the tip would be visible is 1.5 miles. Then you even have to bring the base of the mountain above that point. So, yeah, they're saying that the refraction causes this mountain to raise 3 miles in the air to cast the peculiar illusion that the Earth is a plane, even though it's a sphere, because of refraction. But this is absolutely absurd because refraction causes light waves to bend down, and it certainly does not cause objects to magically apparently raise up in the air 3 miles and also appear to be upon a perfect plane as everything else, as we do see in reality. So observable reality does not match hypothetical globe Earth theory, and this is just one really great example. Now, here's the other thing. Refraction works in the opposite direction, as they say. So even if you give them refraction, it shouldn't raise this mountain up 3 miles. it should actually cause the mountain to appear lower than it actually is. And in fact, this is the exact cause of good old Columbus's observation of ships going over the curve of the horizon. What we're actually seeing is perspective upon a plane, but instead of the ship going over a curve, what's happening is that light is refracting, the light bouncing off the ship is refracting, and it's causing the light to drop lower and lower. So we're not seeing the ship go over a curve, we're seeing the light curve as it gets to a certain point where refraction becomes more and more prevalent with distance. So yeah, this is a really, really great piece of evidence that I like to refer back to, just because, as far as I know to date, at least in July of 2016, I believe, this was the world record holder for long distance landscape photography. Another thing I'll mention really quickly is how we're not seeing, well, we're seeing a perfectly flat base of this mountain range apparently. And, frankly, what we should see over this area, we can get sort of a scale for this. If that's 2.5 miles, if you take one of these lengths and let's see, sorry, window control. And we just go ahead and we'll rotate it if I can. So we know that's about 2.5 miles, give or take, maybe less, but pretty damn close to 2.5 miles. We could say 2 for, to err on the side of caution, but we'll just give it 2.5 to be safe. Okay, so the length of this is 0.63 equals 2.5 miles. So let me just get a note of this here. 0.63 is 2.5 miles. Okay. Okay, and this is 16.64. So we'll do okay, so 26 times that, and then we'll just multiply that by 2.5. So we're talking about 60 miles, unless I just did my math wrong here. Yeah, that's a good amount of miles. At any rate, what we should be seeing if the Earth was curved, and again, we're talking about physical mountains sitting on the ground. We're not talking about water that is not jutting up above the ground. So you can use this argument here only for these distant mountain ranges because they are, flat across the plane on their base. And we should see a frowning effect. This point right here in the center of our point of view should be higher than the edges over here. And it shouldn't be by much, but discernibly, that's a perfectly flat plane. And over 50 miles, well, we'll just call it 50 and split that by 2, 25 miles on either side. We should see quite a bit of drop. I mean, I could do the curvature calculation real quick. We'll do 25 miles times, whoops, 25 times 25, so 25 squared times 0.6666666. That'll give us 416 feet. Should be 416 feet higher in the center than it is on the edges, and yet, that would be minuscule in these scales. But it doesn't seem like there's any feat of, frowning away from that central point if the Earth was a ball. But yeah, so this is just another one of those really, really excellent physical pieces of evidence. Oh, and the guy that shot that picture here, Mark Brett, I want to say. It's on his website here where, oh, and of course I lost I don't have it up. But anyway, I had an email conversation with him. I asked him, could I use his image here in my videos and in my book? And he said, absolutely. And he asked me some questions like what was the book about? And I replied to him in email without saying the earth is flat, blah, blah, blah. I pretty much broke it down for him that his image here, his picture that he took, was really great proof that the Earth isn't a sphere. And I'd asked him if he had ever heard of flat Earth because I had maybe kind of assumed that he had, with this sort of information at his fingertips. And of course, he had never heard of flat Earth, and he came back with some rebuttals to, the typical standard rebuttals that we're used to. And who knows? This was a long time ago, so perhaps he is at least a global skeptic by now. But yeah, really, really great stuff. Yeah, guys, I hate to cut this one so short, but I literally just got done doing this live stream not too long ago, and so I did a compressed version for you guys this time. One thing I'd ask, if I do future live streams like this on my backup channel, at least for the next 3 months, if you guys want to send me some suggestions of topics that you'd like for me to cover, I'll try to cover them next time, the first time, and get it done right the first time. But at least that way I can maybe tailor my live streams towards the stuff that you guys want to see. So I guess I'm going to wrap this one up pretty quickly. If you'd like to support this channel through PayPal, you can do so to paypal.me/themorgile or directly to themorgile@gmail.com. With that, God bless y'all. Spread the word, spread the world, and peace out, everybody. Thanks so much for joining.